Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Okay, where can I put it? Hi everyone, my name is Beverly Douglas and I am an alcoholic. And I'm very proud to stand here before you tonight and tell you that I'm a sober woman alcoholic, because this wasn't the case a little over 33 years ago. I haven't been sober that long. I stood in a mental institution at that time. I'll be sober 30 years the 10th of next month. So I stood in a mental institution, and thank you so much. I had been out on one of those little day trips that they let you out on occasionally if you've been on your good behavior. Some of you have been there, good. And anyway, that particular day it was aboard a fishing boat, and they were serving beer aboard the boat. And even though it was against the rules of the hospital, I'd seen some of the other patients drinking, so I thought, well, they can't throw us all out, you know. So I decided I'd have a few. And needless to say, I was quite drunk by the time I got back to the hospital that night. And they kept me downstairs and they fed me and they gave me enough time to sober up a little bit before taking me back upon the ward. And we had a new patient on our ward at that particular time. And she was being treated for something I had never heard of before called alcoholism. And when I came through what we call the day room to get back to my room, because they had told me that I was to go directly to my room upon getting on the ward, she followed me back into my room. And she looked over at me and she said, "Beverly, I think you're an alcoholic." Well, now, I want you to know I have never been so insulted in my life. And I told her in no uncertain terms that she needn't lay her thing on me, that by God, I was crazy. And the sad part of it was that I really meant it. You know, I had rather been called crazy than whatever this thing was as an alcoholic, because if you had seen Lenore, you could have understand why I felt that way. But anyway, I was so insulted that I went to the psychiatrist the next day, and I told him what Lenore had to say to me. And I said, "Now, Dr. Valentine, what do you think about that?" And he looked over at me and he shook his head and he said, "No, Beverly," he said, "I can't see where you have any problem with alcohol." He said, "If you can just learn to cope with some of these problems you have, you know." Well, hell, I had been coping until they got me in there. I mean, drinking was my way of coping. I don't know what he done. But anyway, when I was released, I was in there 6 months, and when I was released, they had set up with my husband at that time an appointment and a setup with a private psychiatrist when I was to be released from there. Now, I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about a drunk, because looking out over the bunch of you, I think y'all all kind of know how to get drunk. You know, so anyway, but I do want to identify myself to you and let you know where I come from as briefly as possible. You'll notice as I get going along here, because I get real excited about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I will not be speaking English, I'll be speaking Southern. I come from a little town in Florida, and it was nice to hear that somebody was here tonight from Florida. It made me feel good. I come from West Palm Beach, which isn't very far from Hollywood, Florida. But anyway, I don't remember what the occasion was, but I remember that Daddy said to us kids, I had 2 older brothers and 2 boy cousins that lived next door that I grew up with, and they were my sole playmates. I didn't have any little girls to play with. You know, come to think of it, I still like to play with little boys. I never got over that. Anyway, Daddy had said to us kids, he said, when you're old enough, I think he caught us smoking. I think that was the reason for it, but I can't really say for sure. He said, when you kids are old enough to go to work, that you can earn your own money and you can afford to buy your own cigarettes with and your own booze, as far as I'm concerned, you're old enough to drink and smoke. Well, hell, needless to say, I went to work at a real early age. Really what happened about that time was that the war came along, and for any of you young people that are here tonight, that was the Second World War, not the first one. I want to get that one straight right off, you know. I mean, things are bad enough as it is. Anyway, and I see a few of you out there old enough to remember that Second World War. It was people then were very patriotic. They didn't burn their draft cards and bras and all the crazy things and the flags that they do today. We really believed in our country. And anyway, it was like the whole world just went on a party, and all I did was just join the party. The only thing was when the party was over, I didn't go home, you know. And you know, I still have that problem today. I'm still a party girl. Only thing is today I don't drink, you know, and that's the big difference in my life today, is that I don't drink. Now, and I loved it when, I think it was Karen that got up, the birthday girl with 5 years, that said, you know, you know, it's, so many things happens, you know, it's like a whole new world. We not only begin to look different when we sober up, but the whole world begins to look different to us. And in fact, it is different. You know, when I sobered up, it was like, you know, I thought I knew so much when I got sober, and it was like I stepped out into the world and said, wow, you know, there's a whole new world out here that I didn't even know anything about. I was one of those that I knew all the answers when I got here. Now I know that none of y'all are like that. It was the questions I didn't know. And I say that facetiously, but I mean it, because, you know, it's the questions that are really important, questions I had to learn to ask myself, and in order to be able to apply what's in this big book. Anyway, I left Florida and came out here to California because the doctor had suggested that I do that because I was married to a man who he called an habitual drunkard. Now, I was a blackout drinker myself by the time I was 16. That's how come I was married to him. But anyway, it was a terrible, terrible marriage. It was a very drunken marriage, and he was a very violent man. He was what the book talks about when they say the Jekyll and the Hyde. He used to beat the hell out of me, you know, as he stood over the top of me and said how much he loved me. And, you know, that wasn't bad. It was the fact that I believed him that was, you know, that was so crazy. Anyway, I did come out here to California because my mother was stationed. My brother was stationed here in Long Beach, and he had brought my mother out here, and she liked it. So when I went through divorce, she sent me a one-way ticket, and I had a baby that was only 6 weeks old when I left my first husband. And fear and pain, I got to tell you, has always been my strongest motivators. Drunk or sober, fear or pain will cause me to take some kind of an action, right or wrong. I will take some kind of an action behind that. But anyway, I came on out here to California, and I thought, well, now I can pick up on my social drinking again, you know. And that was a laugh. I left him, you know, get this one, because I did not want my child raised with a drunken father. And look where I stand today. You know, my daughter was 14 years old before I was sobered up. But anyway, one thing I had learned in that first marriage is you don't go to bed with a man first, you marry them first. You know, and that way they don't have any comebacks, you know, to call you all kinds of names and things. But anyway, I got to tell you, I left him when she was 6 weeks old, and by the time she was almost 3 years old, it had been a long, dry summer. I kid you not. I met this young Irish Catholic boy, and he asked me to marry him, and I figured that my daughter needed a father and that I needed a husband, and that's as good a reason as any to get married, because you see, I never wanted to be in love again because loving hurt too much. I went through an awful lot of hurt when I left that man, even though that was my choice. But anyway, now we all know that all Irish Catholics are alcoholics. Hell, they're all here in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. So this boy did not drink. I'll bet you in the year that I was married to him, I never seen him take 2 beers. But anyway, we had been married a little less than a year, and I remember one night he came home from work, and he looked down at me, and he said, Beverly, he said, I love you an awful lot, but he said, you've either got to give up that drinking or I'm going to have to leave. Well, I said goodbye to Paul, And Mom and I were back together again. And we had just came home from work, and I had put the baby to bed, and we were in the living room, and Mama looked over at me, and she said, you know, honey, she said, we ought to get ourselves some kind of business. I got a real kick out of the leader up here tonight, because it's pretty much what I did. And she said, you know, of course, to ensure my daughter a more secure future, and us too, of course, you know. And I thought it was a terrific idea. I had a little bit of cash, and Mama had a AAA credit rating, so we did. We got a business. A liquor store. And what else does an alky get? But anyway, I was divorced again and single, and I was into the morning drink by this time, and what had begun to happen was that instead of getting sober with the morning drink and getting well, I was getting drunk all over again. And you know, and it wasn't working out because I had a great deal of responsibility toward this child and also the business that we had at that time. And I didn't quite know what to do about it, but lucky for me, I fell in love again. And, well, you know what I was doing. I was falling in heat, for God's sakes. Well, it was love to me. It was all I knew, you know. But anyway, this man introduced me to a thing called the barley sandwich. Does anybody here know what a barley sandwich is? Okay, it's just beer and tomato juice. That's all it is. You look like it doesn't taste good. Honey, I gotta tell you, it didn't, but you see, it worked. And by this time in my life, booze was the only thing that was consistent. And what that did was it sort of slid me into the day. Now, husbands were coming and going, jobs were coming and going, friends were coming and going, but alcohol was consistent in my life. And it just kept me moving. And anyway, we did get married. And now I want to try to get over into the book now. And I want to tell you the symptoms that ended me up at UCLA. I had woke up one morning and to get ready for work, and I was making the bed, and all of a sudden I noticed that the bedspread was wet. And I looked around, and there was nothing sitting around that I could see, and I figured, well, what the heck, you know, but I had to go to work. I was a moving drunk. And I went on into the bathroom to get dressed for work, and I looked up in the mirror, and it wasn't that I was crying, but it was like somebody had turned on two water faucets. The water was just running down my face. And of course, it scared the heck out of me, you know, but I always had a fixer. And remember, fear and pain has always been my motivator. And I always also had a bar in my house. And so I went on into the den or the bar and poured myself a couple of hookers, and those are shots, not women. Just want to get that straight. Anyway, and, you know, and the water just shut off, and I just went on to work, you know. And I come home that afternoon and got as far as the living room, and all of a sudden my body just started jumping and jiving all over the place, and I couldn't stop. You know how your stomach feels when you got a bad hangover, you know, and it's real nervous right in the pit? Well, this thing just went all over my whole body. And I was just shaking like a leaf and about to jump out of my own skin. And I knew that if I could just get to that fixer, I'd be okay. And finally got myself turned in the right direction and hopped right on into that bar, and I grabbed for the bottle because I knew I needed something immediately, you know, and without thinking, I just unscrewed the top of the bottle and turned it up, and what happened was is that when the bottle hit my mouth, you know, with me jumping and jiving the way I was, it broke this tooth off right here in the front, and I have left it broke because it's good reminder for me what it's like. And it also broke the bottle too. And then because I wasn't thinking straight, I was so filled with fear, you know, of what was happening to me, and I tried to pour it into a glass. Well, you know, I broke the glass and some more of the bottle, and I'm looking around and I'm desperate. I'm just, you know, really desperate. And finally I looked down at the coffee table, and I have a huge champagne glass, not a brandy snifter now, but a huge champagne glass that I had sitting on that coffee table. And I finally got some, in fact, I still have that champagne glass. It sits right in my hallway on the attaché there, and I have a little mink teddy bear that sits in him today. But anyway, I finally got some booze poured into that champagne glass. Of course, it went all over the coffee table and the floor too. And I just fell to my knees and slurped that out of that champagne glass like an animal of some kind. And finally, when I got enough in me, you know, that I began to not shake quite so bad, where I was able to really, you know, just pour some in a glass. And I finally got enough in me where the shaking began to stop. And I thought, damn boy, you know, what was that? Because I'd never had anything like that happen to me before. I mean, I've had the shakes, but nothing like that. And anyway, it was a few days later, and I had come home from work, and before fixing dinner, I had decided I'd lay down and take a short nap. And when I woke up, I was on the floor, and I had wet all over myself. I had mucus all over my face and in my hair. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified, because I was also vaguely aware that this was not the first time that something like this had happened to me. And anyway, I poured myself a couple of hookers, you know, and nothing happened. And I drank some more. And still, the fear inside of me was just terrifying. And so I didn't know what else to do, so I called the doctor. And he told me, he said, Beverly, don't try to drive your car. He said, you get a cab. And he said, come on in immediately. And when I got in there, it was a clinic-like thing. I was living in Glendale at the time. And they sent me through the whole thing. And what they all came up with when they were all through with me, that I was having epileptic seizures, and then I was in the midst of a nervous breakdown. Now, you and I both know that what I was having was alcoholic convulsions. But you see, I didn't know that then. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. And that was how I ended up at UCLA and listed as a manic depressive, which our book says it can write chapters about. You know, there are so many of us that were manic depressive. Now, what I found out for me, since being sober, is that alcohol will induce so many of the same exact symptoms that many mental and emotional and physical illnesses will, you know, produce. And if it will introduce those, you know, that even the doctors can't tell the difference, it will also cover them up. You may have some kind of problems after you sober up. And if so, for God's sake, don't go to another alcoholic and ask him what you should do, because they're liable to tell you, you know, and it could kill you. Now, our book says that after we've been sober for a little while, that if we're having any physical symptoms or mental or emotional, deep emotional problems, we get into the people that specialize in that field. We go to psychiatrists and doctors and so on and so forth. But anyway, I forgot where I was. I'm okay. Where was I? God. I ended up at UCLA. Okay, now, when I came out of there, as I said, they had me go into a private psychiatrist. Now, I want to go right into my moment of clarity here. I have a heck of a time on short time here. I was sitting alone at home on a Friday night. And my daughter was away for the weekend. And the man that I was married to at that time was about 5 or 6 hours late getting home from work. We girls all know where you guys are when you're 5 or 6 hours late getting home from work, don't we, honey? You betcha we do. You're out with her, the one who understands you. Don't sit over there and laugh, honey, because some of us were the ones who understood them. True. Hate to say it, but it's true. Anyway, I had waited about as long as I could, and I had to have a drink, and I just had a couple, and here he come, you know, and he walked over to me, and he looked down, and he said, you're drunk, and I'm not going to take you anywhere, and with that, he went on up into the bedroom and passed out. Now, I remember fixing myself another drink, and I walked from the den up into the kitchen, and this is still the same home that I live in today, by the way. And I walked up into the kitchen, and my kitchen faces the street and the driveway in the front. And I looked out that window, and there were 2 brand new cars sitting in that driveway. And I walked through my home, and it was a brand new home, and it was newly decorated from furniture over and from Sloan's in Beverly Hills. And I don't say that to be braggadocious. I'll tell you why I say it in just a minute. You'll understand. And I stood there and I looked around, you know, and I walked on out into the, you know, it was the kind of a home that if you opened up the book of the Better Homes and Gardens, you would see one similar to that in the book. And I walked on out into the backyard, and it was beautifully landscaped and well manicured, you know, and it was the kind of a yard that belonged in the home that belonged in the book of the Better Homes and Gardens. And if you could have seen my husband and my daughter and myself, we were that family. That's what we presented to the world. That belonged in that yard, that belonged in that home, that belonged in that book of the Better Homes and Gardens. And yet as I stood there that night, and I remember looking up and crying out and saying, why God? Why now? When I've got everything that I've always wanted, all those material things, you know, why do I want to die? And you know, I couldn't have told you that night, but tonight I can. You see, what good is all you've got if there is no joy in it? And alcohol had taken all of the joy out of my life. It had taken me into a living hell of which I could find no way out of. I think that Christ said something like that when he said, what profits a man who gains the world and then loses his very soul? And you see, that's what had happened. I had lost my very soul. I remember walking on back down into the rumpus room and fixing myself another drink. And for the first time since I was 13 years old, I knew it was not the family, the jobs, the husbands, all those things that I had been rationalizing and justifying the reason why I had to drink like I did and the reason for all of my unhappinesses. I knew it was right there in that glass, right in my hand. And at that very moment, I knew that if I kept on drinking, I was going to die. And at that very same moment, I knew if I quit drinking, I was going to die. Well, what the hell do? You can't drink anymore. You can't drink any less. I did the only thing I knew to do that night. I killed myself. Now, I say that facetiously, and yet our book talks about a rebirth. And I believe that that was my night of conception. Now, I started to say I woke up, but no drunk ever wakes up. Hell, I came to, you know. And I had tubes out my nose, my throat, both arms, and both ankles. And I'm trying to talk, you know, and what's the first question that a drunk asks when he doesn't know, you know, where am I? You know, and this voice came from somewhere and it said, you know, you're in County General Hospital. Next question, why am I in County General Hospital? I live in Chatsworth. We have medical insurance. We have money. Why am I in a county hospital? And this voice walked over to me. It was a policeman, and he looked down at me. People were always looking down at me for some reason. They were looking down at you too, huh? And he said, you know, he said, lady, he said, committing suicide is against the law. Well, now, heck, I didn't know that, or I might not have done it, you know. You know, I was talking one night at a meeting at this, and one of our fellow members who sits on the appellate court today came up to me and he said, honey, you gave a beautiful talk, but he said, you made a little mistake in there. And he said, I want to make a correction for you. He said, committing suicide is not against the law. He said, it's attempting suicide that's against the law. Well, that made more sense, really, you know, when you stop and think about it. But anyway, I guess they put you on hold. They think there's something the matter with you, you know, when you do things like that. But anyway, I guess the psychiatrist is there, called my psychiatrist, and told him, you know, what had happened. And he sent word to me through my mother for that I was not to go home, that I was to come directly to his office upon my release there when they let me go. And I did. And I walked into his office and he said to me, he said, Beverly, you need help and you need it desperately. And he said, I can't help you. He said, here's the number of Alcoholics Anonymous. Will you call them? And I told him that I would. Now, I got you to make you understand. I didn't say these things, but this is what I was thinking. I was a little ticked. I had been going to him for 3.5 years, sometimes as many as 3 times a week. I'd been paying him cut rate prices at $60 for 40 minutes, not even 50, you know. I had almost drank myself to death, darn near killed myself, and he had the nerve to sit there and tell me he couldn't help me. You know, wouldn't you be upset? I was. But anyway, I didn't say anything, and I took the number. Now, I knew it wasn't going to work, because remember Lenore back in the nut ward there at UCLA, if you could have seen her, she told me she'd been to AA 3 times, you know, and if you could have seen her, you would have known why I knew it wasn't going to work, you know. But anyway, I took the telephone number, and I told him I would call him. When I got home, I cleaned up my house, and I got myself freshly bathed and everything, and I did call. And the lady that answered the phone there in Van Nuys said to me, she didn't ask me if I was an alcoholic, and I'm grateful she didn't, because I did not know what an alcoholic was. She said, honey, are you having a problem with drinking? And I said, lady, I sure am. And she said, well, are you drinking right now? Well, I looked around, I didn't see anything sitting close by, and I said, no, I don't think so, not right at the moment. And she said, well, can you hold off for a little while? I'd like to send some people out to talk to you. And I thought about it, and I said, well, if you'll make it quick. Well, you see, I'd been out of the hospital for 5 hours, and I was beginning to get real thirsty, I'll tell you. Anyway, I couldn't hardly wait for whoever was going to come, you know, to get to my home, because I wanted to tell them all about that man I was married to. And I want you to know, they came, they were there for almost 2 hours. Every time I would try to tell them about him, they'd start talking to each other about themselves You talk about selfish and self-centered. I mean, these women were it. And finally, after almost 2 hours, they got up and went over to the door, turned around and pointed their finger at me, and they said, "Oh, by the way, Beverly, you be dressed and ready to go. We're going to come by and take you to a meeting at 8 o'clock. They never even asked me if I wanted to go. Well, anyway, they came. I was dressed, and we went. And from now on, I'm going to talk about this book. And I sure ain't got much time. There's so much I want to tell you. And I'm not here to tell you what you have to do. I'm only here telling you what I had to do in order for me to stay sober. And I will say this, is that I don't care how much you talk about this book in meetings. I don't care how much you talk about it on a one-to-one basis. I don't care how much you talk about it from podiums like I'm doing here tonight. Until you take what's in this book and bring it into your life and live it, it has absolutely no value at all. It's only words. It's only words, and they don't mean a thing. It's just like my husband when he was standing over the top of me, beating the hell out of me, saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you." It doesn't mean anything. What means something is the action we take. And I like to talk about principles, morals, and values, and the ones that I have learned out of this book in order for me to stay sober. Now, you'll notice that alcoholics really don't do things right or wrong. We just do them a little backwards occasionally, And if you've noticed, I was trying to watch them as they were lighting the candles there on the birthday cake. Used to, with these round cakes, they'd put all the candles around the outside, and then they'd put a couple on the inside to make it hard for them to blow them all out. And even the old timers used to do this. I used to sit and watch them and think, they're crazy. They'd light all the ones around the candle and then burn the hell out of their hand lighting the inside. Yeah. They do. Every once in a while I'll still see somebody doing it. And if we were really logical people, it would really be men riding side saddle, not women. That's logic. Stop and think about that one. That's smarts, just thinking about it. Anyway, all right, now, being an alcoholic and not doing things right or wrong, I'm just going to do them a little backwards. And when I'm talking about principles, I'm talking about the way I live my life on a daily basis tonight. Well, now, I had morals, values, and principles. I was taught these things when I grew up. We all were. It was just that I simply didn't live by them when I was drinking. And coming into here, it said I had to, in order to stay sober, there has to be a change of thought and attitude. There absolutely has to be if we're going to stay sober. So in that 12th step, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as the results of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So I went to my sponsor and I said, well, what are they talking about? And she said, well, honey, she said, you're going to have to read the book, and it will tell you what they're talking about. And then, I went to speaker meetings, and when I was brand new, I looked up at people with awe, the speakers, because the words they had to say were so profound. And I just, I set them on pedestals, and I think that many of us do when we come in here. But anyway, there was this one speaker that lived on this side of the hill, and I won't mention Clancy's name. Well, God knows he needs all the advertising he can get. But I thought I heard him say, now you got to remember, when we're new, at least, well, I know that other people do the same thing. We don't hear well. We hear things that people don't say. And I was no exception. And when I went to a meeting and I heard him speaking one day, I thought he said that you could work this program any way you wanted to. And I thought, now where did he read that at? Because people were telling me I had to work them in order. Well, this man had been around for a long time, and I thought I heard him say you could work it any way you want to. And I wanted to know where it was in the book. So I called my sponsor, and, because one of the first things that they told me when I went into an AA meeting was to get the big book. And I did. I got the book, and I brought it home, and I placed it on the coffee table right in the middle of the living room, right in front of God and everybody. And, and then I heard get a sponsor, and I did, and I got one of those sponsors that says, thou shalt have no other gods before me, one of those. And y'all got them here too, huh? Okay. And then they said, get pamphlets, and I got those, and I brought them home, and I read them, and I placed them all around my big book there on the coffee table, and I got some more, and I placed them on the stands on each end of the couch there, and so on and so forth. And then and this sponsor, one of the first things she told me, she said, Beverly, she said, when you're in a meeting, she said, if by mistake that they should call on you to share, she said, you stand up and you give them your name, and you state your illness. And she said, and then you sit down and you shut up because that's all you know. They don't do that anymore. That's a shame. It really is. You know, it really is, because that's really all you know when you get here. You know, you think you know it all, but that's only a thought. Anyway, she had also told me, she said, Beverly, she said, I'm going to name some types of meetings that I want you to go to. And she said, you can go to any of these that you want to, but she said, these are the types. And she named a speaker meeting, and a problem discussion meeting, and a participation meeting, and a book study meeting. And then she did it. She said, and a woman stag meeting. You know. I looked over at her and I said, Eunice, I said, there is no way I'm going into those PTA meetings with those gossiping, backstabbing bitches. Well, you know, I didn't like women very well. I had 2 husbands that, you know, I'd come home from work and find my best girlfriends in bed with them, you know, in my bed. So I really didn't have a lot of use for women when I got here. And anyway, she looked over at me and she said, Beverly, she said, you look like a woman and you dress like a woman and occasionally you talk like one, but I don't think you know what it is to be a woman. And she said, I'm insisting that you go to these women's stag meetings. And I didn't have any choice, you know, and so I went into those PTA meetings, and sure enough, when I got in there, I found some gossiping, backstabbing bitches. But let me tell you what else I found. I found some very warm, wonderful women who literally saved my life. And I mean that from the very bottom of my heart. We all know that you men will help us with our spiritual program. But I would suggest to the newcomer women that they get a good, firm, basic program first, because you're going to need it. Okay? Now, anyway, so I called the sponsor up, and she always had the same pat answer to me. It's, you know, and I said, well, where is this in the book that we can work it any way we want to? And she said, honey, she said, read the book. She said, you'll find the answer in there. She was all, I just wanted to let her have it, you know, because that was a pat answer with her. So I got back in this book, you know, and I read, and this is what I found, and we hear it read in almost every meeting. It says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. There was no S on path. One path. And I didn't know what that path was. And so I'm on the telephone again calling her up, you know, and she's got that same pat answer. Honey, read the book. The answer's in the book. For the newcomers that are here tonight, if you get a sponsor that tells me that, let me give you a jump on them. I want to tell you why they tell you to read the book. They know the answer is in the book. They just don't know where in the heck it is in the book. They've got you reading this whole book. I used to think they were dumb, but I come to find out they were pretty smart. It was her way of getting me and making me go into this book to look up my answers. I remember one time, you know, I threatened her with getting drunk, and she looked over at me and she said, let me tell you something, honey. She said, if it was after one of those PTA meetings I'd been to, too. She had her little entourage around her, you know, and I think, you know, I was threatening her. And she said, let me tell you something, honey. She said, if you decide to get drunk, and then she remembered I was suicidal also, she said, if you decide to get drunk and commit suicide, I want you to know I'm not responsible for that. Well, I looked up at her and I said, well, you're my sponsor. What the heck are you responsible for? I mean, they got to be good for something. And she looked over at me and she reached down and she picked up my book and she shook it right in my face. She hit me right across the bridge of my nose. I'd like to think she really didn't mean to do that. And she said, I'm responsible for helping you to learn what's in this book and how to apply it to your life. That's what I'm responsible for. And she said, the rest is up to you. Well, I didn't like to hear that. But anyway, I got back in this book, and I'm looking for what this path is, because I have no idea what the path is. And let me tell you what I found for me. It says a lack of power is our dilemma. And to find this power greater than ourselves that will solve our problem is exactly what this book is all about. Now, I've seen some people back there talking, so I know you didn't hear me, and I know that there's some people here, and especially newcomers, that don't want to hear that. So watch my lips, because I'm going to repeat it, okay? Rarely Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. A lack of power is our dilemma. And to find this power greater than ourselves that will solve our problem is exactly what this book is all about. Now, it uses words like exactly, precisely, absolutely, and it even goes on to say it gives clear-cut direction. That does not leave any room for the fertile imagination of an alky to run around in. I mean, it's got you right by the you-know-wheres. Anyway, so I'm in this book. Now, another thing I heard, or I thought I heard, this same man say was, today I no longer have a drinking problem. Today I have a living problem. That sounded good to me. However, if you are as alcoholic as I am, and somebody says something like that to you, for Christ's sake, run. That can kill you if you start thinking that way. I was dying from alcoholism when I got here to you people. Alcohol is my problem. It was then, it still is today. I have living problems today. You darn right I do. Hell, I'm alive. I'm breathing in and out. And you don't have to be an alcoholic to have living problems. You know, all you got to do is just be alive and breathe in and out, and you're going to have problems. That's life. You know, so be real careful how your thinking is. It talks about the insanity in the second step, and the insanity that I understand this book is talking about is the thinking preceding that first drink. That is the insanity of the alcoholic, that this time it's going to be different, or that this time I'm perfectly justified in picking up that drink. No. Once you are here and you learn about alcoholism, there is no justification, no rationalization to ever pick up a drink again. Because in this book, it does not teach us how to get away with. It teaches us how to get away from things that we used to do. And if you think you're going to come in here and get sober and start getting away with it now because you're sober, it ain't going to work. You're going to find yourself in deep trouble. Deep trouble. Anyway, so in the back of the book, there is a part in that, oh God, I'm running out of time. There's a part of that book, and my husband always used to start his talks out with it. And it says, there is a principle, which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all argument, that which cannot help but keep a man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation. So what that said to me was, regardless of what I thought was going on, regardless of how crazy I thought the people was, or how out, or whatever, that it was necessary for me to stay in here long enough to really get to know what this program was all about and what you people were doing. Because you told me you were alcoholics and that you had found a way out. You had found a way out. And on page 17 in this book, and I usually don't give page numbers, but on 17, that was the first page that I really began to understand. And it says that we alcoholics, we here in Alcoholics Anonymous, know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. And yet nearly all have recovered. They are not in recovery, gonna recover, may recover, can't recover. It says nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. It says that we have a common problem in here and that we have a common solution. And in talking about that, it's talking about alcoholics and nobody else. No other problems. We have a singleness of purpose in this program, and we have a responsibility as far as I understand this book, and that responsibility is to carry this spiritual message to alcoholics, period. A spiritual message to alcoholics. Anyway, I had to look up words. I didn't understand a lot of words, and it's saying, that we've recovered and that we've solved. Well, does recovered mean that I'm no longer an alcoholic? Book says once alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Well, I've solved it. Does that mean that, that I'm cured now because I've recovered? That's what recovered meant to me. No. It says there is no cure for alcoholism. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent upon our spiritual condition. Okay, so I went into the dictionary and I looked those words up because it was very important to me, and thank God my sponsor taught me to do that. Don't assume the meaning of words. And when I looked up the word solved, it says to make clear, to find a solution. It became clear to me that I was an alcoholic and that there was a solution. Recovered, what would that mean? It said that, my dictionary, I don't know what yours will say, but mine said, to gain control over, to gain health. Well, when I stopped drinking, that's what began to happen. But the one that I love the most, it says to save oneself from a slip or a fall. That's recovery. That is recovered. And I just loved it. So anyway, it also talked in the back there about the 3 essentials. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, they said, was the 3 essentials. And the first step, I learned the principle of honesty. When I was honestly able to admit that I was an alcoholic, that my life was unmanageable, and I hear a lot of people in here say, oh, and when they go ahead and they do what they want to do, and whatever that is, that's not right, and they know it's not right. They say, well, after all, I'm just a recovering alcoholic. I mean, that's a cop-out. There's no truth in that, and I don't think anybody that's been here any time is going to buy it, How can I say it? Anyway, it's just an excuse. It's another justification and a rationalization, for doing wrong. And you know it to go off with, and so do we. So if you think you're pulling anything over anybody's eyes, you're only hurting yourself. You're not hurting any of us. But anyway, in that, I learned the principle of honesty. Then I went on to the second step. And in that second step, it said we didn't have to buy it all right now. All we had to do was simply keep an open mind. And that was that contempt prior to investigation. So I said, okay, I can do that. And then I heard the word spiritual. And I thought, this thing ain't going to work. And, until I looked the word spiritual up. And in my book, it said, that being spiritual is simply an elevation of thought and feeling. Well, I don't know about you, but the moment I set aside the juice, I automatically had an elevation of thought and feeling. I mean, it just, it just happens. It's not anything we even have to try to work at. And that was another word, this book says these are the steps we took. All right, what does work mean? Work means to bring it into your life. It's an activity. You bring it into your life. You use it. You live it every day. That's what all this means to me. Then, also in that second step, it said God could restore us to sanity. It didn't say would, just said he could. My husband always said in my case he hadn't done so yet, but maybe next year, so. But anyway, and then so now I've got 2 principles. I've got honesty and open-mindedness, and then I went into the third step, and in that third step it says that that we have to make a decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God, as we understand him. Now, that third step, in the first 2 steps, it called them a cornerstone, which is the very basics, the very foundation of our program, is the first 2 steps. And in that third step, it said that this is the keystone. This is the step in which we walk through the archway of freedom. Freedom from the bondage of alcohol. Freedom from the bondage of our own thinking, our own selves, And so I had to look up the word keystone because I didn't know what it meant. And when I got out of there, I envisioned an archway. And in that archway, there is that first mortar, that first stone that goes in there. And that archway to freedom. And our first 2 steps, which are our basic steps, our foundation of our program, are attached to that third step. And every step thereafter in our program, in our lives, is attached to that third step. And that step must be firmly in place, because when things begin to go wrong in your life, if that step is not firmly in your life, it's going to crumple. Your whole program is going to crumple, and you're going to find yourself back out there again. This is a spiritual message that we're carrying here. So now I've got honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I can't, he can, so let him. I wanted to get a divorce when I first sobered up. My sponsor said no. She said, you're too sick. She says, some people, I tell them they have to wait 1 year before they can make any major decisions. In your case, you're sicker than most. I want you to wait 3. I kid you not. I'm glad she told me. I'm going to talk just a couple of minutes over. Please forgive me. This is very important. I want to talk a few moments here about relationships. And I want to tell you why. Because it used to be that, and the book says it says that resentments are the #1 offender. We lose more people, or used to, behind resentments than anything else. But, that's the only place where it uses the word disease in the first 164 pages of our book. It says, from resentment stem all forms of spiritual disease. When the spiritual malady is overcome, then we straighten out physically and mentally. But the spiritual malady has to be overcome. So anyway, I talk about relationships because today in AA, we are losing more people behind these so-called relationships. I want to throw up every time I hear the word. Anyway, and I was no different than anybody else. I'm not here to put anybody down or any of those things. I'm just telling you what I've learned, okay, for myself. I went through a divorce, but when she was telling me, she said, I don't want you to make any major decisions. I want you to get a good, firm, basic program. I want you to get emotionally involved. Well, emotionally involved did not mean the same thing that it means today. Emotional involvement meant that, when you were working with newcomers, you didn't get emotionally involved with them because they were liable to go out and get drunk again. And then you were left there with the disappointment and the hurt. And several different times we lost some of our members that had been here for a while because they followed them out just to prove to them that alcohol didn't work, And so, this was the purpose of it then when I came in. Well, I had no trouble with that because, when I'm married, I'm married. Now, when I'm single, that's something else. But she had added a little addendum onto that, and she said, Beverly, there is a clubhouse here in the valley, and it's called the Owl Nest. And she said, I want you to stay away from there. She said, there's a bunch of dirty old men there helping women with their spiritual program. I hope y'all have one of those out here. God, they're so much fun. Anyway. I talk about this. I don't care whether you're a man, woman, or child. When you walk through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, you walk in here with two problems. Bad breath and a broken heart. Booze and sex, in plain language, if you will. Okay. Now, first place I had was the LNS when I got that divorce. I'm not dumb, And I got over there and I sat there and I looked around and I was just like a little kid in a candy store and I looked around and I said, I'll have him, and him, And I knew I was in trouble again because I was in heat again. You see, I had this secondary problem here. And I knew if I was in heat, and I hope that I'll not be offensive to anybody, but to me this is terribly important. And I just died laughing when I read this book. You know what page that talks about sex is on page 69, and I couldn't believe it. But over on page 70, if you'll turn it over, okay, on page 70 it says, if we are truly sorry for what we have done and have asked God to take us on to better things, we believe we will have been forgiven. We believe we will have been forgiven. But if we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink again. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our own experiences. And that was a big pill for me to swallow. And you got to remember, fear and pain have always been my strongest motivators. So, I'm in heat, I'm in trouble, and I don't know what to do. And and I'm telling my babies the same thing I had been taught. You don't make any major decisions, you don't get emotionally involved, But I had my own little addendum, but I said, if you need to get laid, that's all right. Well, what I figured was if they could, without getting emotionally involved, they could come back and tell me how, and then I'd be okay, right? No, it doesn't work. I got to tell you this little story, and then I'm going to end. Okay, there was this little dog, and he lived with his family by a railroad track. And he woke up this one morning. It was a beautiful spring day out, and he wanted to go play, so he let out a scratch and yelped, and the guy come and let him out. And he ran up on this little hill close to the house there, and there was a railroad track, and he was running along this railroad track, and he was sniffing at the weeds, and he was sniffing at the flowers, and his little ears were just blowing back in the breeze, and he was just having the most marvelous time. And a train come along and cut off a little tiny weeny piece of his tail. And he let out a yip, and he turned around to see what happened to that little tiny piece of tail, and a train come along from the other direction and cut off his head. Now, honey, don't you be like that little dog and lose your head over a little tiny piece of tail, okay? Because that's what we do. That's exactly what we do in here, and we are losing more people behind this. Why is it do we try to get emotionally well instead of spiritually well? And yet that's what most of us try to do when we get in here. Anyway, I'm teaching my babies the same thing, so I take an inventory. I don't have time to tell you about that. But anyway, I take this inventory. Now, and that's the fourth step. And in that fourth step, I learned the principle of truth, because in there it says you're going to do some fact-facing and fact-finding. And I'm going to close with this one. Then I went on to my fifth step. And in that fifth step, it says we must tell someone all of our life story, omitting nothing. Someone, one person, all of our life story, omitting nothing. For if we do, we may not overcome drinking. And then it goes on to say, invariably we drank again. Well, I don't know what that does for you, but it scared the heck out of me. And I did not trust this sponsor I had, and I did not know who else to go to tell this story to. So I went back in my book like she had taught me, and this is what I found in there that gave me the release that I needed to be able to go to this woman even though I didn't trust her. It says, cling to the thought that in God's hands, our darkest past is the greatest possession we have. For it is the key to life and happiness, and with that key, we avert death and misery for others. And how that worked for me in my life was, I did not trust Eunice, but I had come to believe in and trust in this power greater than myself. And so with this trust I had in God, I went to Eunice and I told her all of my life story. And there was a part that she identified with me. And I was scared to death when I went to her to tell her this, because, you know, you're telling some really raunchy stuff sometimes, you know, in these inventories. And you don't want anybody else to know about them. It's bad enough you got to tell her, you know, and admit to yourself that you've done these things. But anyway, I went to her and I told her, and there was a part in there that she identified with me. Having an alcoholic mind, the first thing I thought of is, she tells on me, I'll tell on her. You know, I was relieved. You know, I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I walked out of there, you know, almost a free person. When I came to the part that she shared a part of her story with me, we developed a relationship. And it became a relationship of love. And as I then began to sponsor other women, and they shared a part of their life with me, or their life with me, and I shared a part of mine with them, in most cases we also developed a relationship of love. And isn't love God, and isn't God spiritual, and isn't that what the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous all about? Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. A lack of power is our dilemma. And to find this power greater than ourself that will solve our problem is exactly what our book is all about. And in closing, I want to repeat something that is very near and dear to me. My life shall touch a dozen lives before this day is done. Leave countless marks, for good or ill, ere sets the evening sun. This is the wish I always wish, the prayer I always pray. Lord, may my life help other lives it touches along the way. Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.